David is worth $3 billion. He owns the hospital wing where he was born. But every evening at 7, his wife Patricia disappears. She tells him she's attending charity meetings. She returns with paint on her silk blouses and a sadness in her eyes she won't explain. Last Tuesday, David followed her. She led him to a crumbling orphanage on the west side of the city. What he found inside changed everything he knew about his family. Patricia is 32, with long braided hair and a smile that made David fall in love 3 years ago. They met at a charity gala. Their marriage appeared perfect, a penthouse, private jets, designer clothes. But David noticed the pattern 4 months ago. The disappearances, the excuses that didn't add up. She stopped letting him near her phone. He told himself it was nothing. Then he followed her to that orphanage, and the children he found inside looked exactly like him. Understand what David saw that night. You have to understand who he is. David grew up in a 30-room mansion in the hills above the city. His father built a shipping empire from nothing. By the time David was 20, his family's company controlled 40% of all imports coming through the port. By 30, David had tripled that number. He was on the cover of Forbes magazine twice before his 35th birthday. Business analysts called him ruthless. Competitors called him dangerous. He called himself thorough. David had always been suspicious by nature. It was what made him good at business. He read contracts 3 times. He investigated every partner before signing anything. He trusted numbers more than people. When he met Patricia at a charity gala 3 years ago, she was the first person who made him question that approach. She wasn't wealthy, she wasn't connected. She was a volunteer at the event, serving drinks to men worth more than she'd earn in a lifetime. David noticed her because she didn't try to impress him. She didn't flirt. She simply handed him a glass of champagne and said she hoped he was enjoying himself. That was it. No hidden agenda. No pitch. For a man who had been chased by women his entire adult life, her indifference was intoxicating. They married 18 months later. David's friends warned him. A billionaire marrying a woman with nothing to her name, it was a risk, but David had investigated her thoroughly before proposing. Her background was clean, no debts, no scandals, no former husbands. She worked as a teacher's assistant at an elementary school in the city. She volunteered on weekends. She attended church every Sunday. She was, by every measurable standard, exactly who she appeared to be. But something was wrong. The first sign appeared 5 months into the marriage. David came home early from a business trip and found Patricia crying in the bedroom. She wiped her tears before he could see them clearly. She said it was nothing, just a sad movie she'd watched. David believed her. He wanted to believe her. Then the phone calls started. Patricia would step out of the room whenever her phone rang. She started keeping it face down on the table. She changed her password. David noticed but didn't say anything. He told himself that everyone deserved privacy. He told himself that his suspicious nature was poisoning something good. 4 months ago, the disappearances began. Every evening at 7, Patricia would leave the penthouse. She said she was attending charity meetings. She was on the board of 3 different organizations. It made sense, but she never brought home documents. She never talked about the meetings afterward. And she started coming home late, sometimes after midnight, with stains on her clothes and a look in her eyes that David had never seen before. Fear, or maybe guilt. He couldn't tell which. 2 weeks ago, David did something he'd never done in his life. He hired a private investigator. He felt ashamed doing it. He was investigating his own wife, a woman who had given him no reason to doubt her except for a feeling he couldn't name. The investigator followed her for 3 days. She drove her car to a parking garage downtown. Then she walked. The investigator lost her twice in the narrow streets of the west side. That alone was suspicious. Patricia didn't know those streets. She'd grown up in the suburbs. She had no reason to be there. David decided to follow her himself. He told himself he was being paranoid. He told himself he would see nothing and then he would apologize and never doubt her again. He waited in his car outside their building. At 7, Patricia walked out wearing a cream blouse and a long skirt. She looked elegant. She looked like the woman he'd married. David followed at a distance. She took the subway. She got off in a neighborhood David had only seen in photographs. The buildings were crumbling. The streets were dark. She walked quickly, with purpose, like she'd made this trip many times before. She stopped in front of an old brick building. A faded sign above the door read, "Mercy House Children's Home." David had never heard of it. He watched her go inside. He waited 5 minutes, then he followed. The hallway smelled like mildew and old paint. David heard voices coming from a room at the end of the corridor. He moved toward them. Through a doorway, he saw Patricia sitting on the floor. Her cream blouse was stained with something. Paint, maybe. She was surrounded by children, 3 of them, 2 boys and a girl. They couldn't have been older than 5. They were holding onto her, clinging to her arms. Patricia was crying, and David saw their faces. The first boy had David's eyes, the narrow shape, the dark brown color. The second boy had David's jaw. The girl had his forehead, his hairline, his skin. It was like looking at photographs of himself as a child. These children were his, he was certain of it, but he'd never seen them before. Patricia had never told him about them, and now she was holding them like a mother holds children she loves. David stepped back from the doorframe. His heart was racing. His mind was spinning through possibilities. Had Patricia had children before they met? Had she adopted them without telling him? None of it made sense. But what David didn't know yet was that the children weren't the secret. They were just the beginning. David didn't confront her that night. He stepped back from the doorframe, walked down the mildewed hallway, and left the building without making a sound. He drove home in a fog. He sat in his car in the parking garage for 40 minutes, staring at the steering wheel. His hands were shaking. His mind was cycling through explanations, each one more unlikely than the last. When Patricia came home at midnight, David was in bed, pretending to sleep. She slipped in beside him quietly. He felt her body tense when she realized he was still awake. Neither of them said anything. The silence between them felt like a wall. The next morning, David told her he had a business meeting. He didn't. He drove straight to Mercy House. He needed to see the children again. He needed to understand what he'd witnessed. The building looked even worse in daylight. The brick was crumbling. The windows were dirty. A rusty playground sat in the back, empty and abandoned. David knocked on the front door. A woman answered. She was older, maybe 60, with gray hair pulled back in a bun. She looked tired. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. She introduced herself as Alina. She ran Mercy House. She'd been running it for 22 years. David lied and said he was interested in making a donation. Alina's face softened. She invited him inside. She showed him the kitchen, the common room, the dormitories where the children slept. The place was falling apart, but it was clean. The children looked fed. They looked cared for, but there were only 11 of them. 11 children in a building designed for 50. Alina explained that funding had dried up. The city had cut their budget 3 years ago. Private donors had stopped giving. She was keeping the place running on prayers and leftover groceries. David asked about the 3 children he'd seen the night before, the 2 boys and the girl. Alina's expression changed. She studied him for a long moment. Then she asked if he was who she thought he was. David said nothing. Alina nodded slowly, like she'd been expecting this day for a long time. She told him the children's names: Marcus, Elijah, Amara, ages 6, 4, and 3. They'd arrived at Mercy House at different times. Marcus came first as an infant. Elijah arrived 2 years later. Amara came when she was barely a year old. Alina led David to a small office in the back of the building. She opened a filing cabinet and pulled out 3 folders. She placed them on the desk in front of him. Each folder contained a birth certificate. David opened the first one. Marcus, father listed as unknown, mother listed as unknown. He opened the second. Elijah, same thing, no parents named. The third folder. Amara, again, no parents listed. But in the margin of each document, someone had written a note in pencil. The handwriting was faint but legible. It said the same thing on all 3, donor file 4479. David asked Alina what the numbers meant. She hesitated. Then she told him about the arrangement. Mercy House wasn't just an orphanage. For years, it had been a receiving home for children born through something called the Lancaster Program. David had never heard of it. Alina explained. The Lancaster Program was a fertility initiative started decades ago by wealthy families in the city. Men from prominent families donated genetic material. The donations were used to help women who couldn't conceive, but the program had a shadow side. Some of those donations were used without the donor's knowledge. Children were born, paperwork was falsified, and when complications arose, the children were quietly placed in homes like Mercy House. David felt his stomach turn. He asked which families were involved. Alina said she didn't know all of them. The program was secretive. She only knew what she'd learned over the years from rumors and fragments of documents, but she knew one name for certain. The family that had funded the program from the beginning. The family whose foundation paid for the building they were standing in. The family whose name was on the plaque outside the front door. The Pemberton family, David's family. David drove home in a trance. He didn't know what to think. His family had funded a fertility program that might have used his genetic material without his consent. Children had been born, 3 of them at least, and they'd been placed in an orphanage. His orphanage, funded by his family's foundation, hidden in plain sight for years. He needed answers. He needed to know if the children were really his. He needed to know how Patricia was involved, because she clearly was involved. She'd been visiting them for months. She knew them. She loved them. You could see it in her face when she looked at them. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't charity work. Patricia knew something, and she'd been keeping it from him since the day they met. That evening, David did something he hadn't done since his father died 3 years ago. He went to the old study on the 3rd floor of the penthouse. His father's things were still there, packed in boxes, untouched since the funeral. David had meant to sort through them, but he'd never found the time, or maybe he'd never found the courage. His father had been a difficult man, controlling, secretive. He'd built an empire, but he'd left a trail of broken relationships behind him. David had spent his whole life trying to be different. He opened the first box, papers, photographs, old contracts, nothing useful. The second box, more of the same. The third box, his hand stopped. Inside was a metal lockbox. David had never seen it before. It was heavy, locked. He searched the box for a key and found nothing. He carried the lockbox to his private office and used a tool from his desk drawer to force it open. Inside were documents, dozens of them, legal papers, financial statements, and a file with a label that made his blood run cold. Donor File 4479. David opened it. His name was on the first page. His medical records, his blood type, his genetic profile, and beneath that a list of names, 3 names: Marcus Pemberton, Elijah Pemberton, Amara Pemberton. They'd been given his family name, his children, born from his genetic material, placed in an orphanage he didn't know existed, and beside each name a signature authorizing the placement, a signature that should have been his, but wasn't. David stared at the signature for a long time. The handwriting was familiar. He'd seen it on contracts, on letters, on the bottom of checks he received as a child. It was the same handwriting that had signed his report cards, the same handwriting that had signed away companies and acquired competitors, the same handwriting that had controlled every aspect of David's life until the day the old man died. Because the signature on those documents belonged to his father. David's father had been dead for 3 years. The signature on those documents was dated 4 years before his death, when David was 36 years old. He tried to remember that time in his life. He'd been working 16-hour days, building the company, traveling for business. His father had still been chairman of the board, still controlling the family foundation, still making decisions David wasn't privy to. David had never questioned it. He'd assumed his father was handling philanthropy, legacy planning, the usual work of wealthy families. He hadn't known his father was signing documents that would create children in David's image and then abandon them to an orphanage. The questions came faster than David could process them. Why would his father do this? Why would he create children and then hide them? Why would he keep David in the dark for years? And how did Patricia fit into all of this? David didn't sleep that night. He sat in his office with the documents spread across his desk, searching for patterns. He found something in the financial statements, payments, regular monthly transfers from the Pemberton Foundation to Mercy House. They'd been happening for 7 years. The amounts varied, but they averaged around $12,000 a month, enough to keep the orphanage running, enough to keep the children fed and housed, but not enough to give them a real home. Not enough to give them parents who loved them. His father had created these children and then paid to keep them hidden, like a subscription to a secret he never intended to reveal. The next morning, David called his lawyer. He didn't explain the situation over the phone. He simply asked for a meeting. Then he called his father's oldest friend, a man named Harold who had served on the foundation's board for decades. Harold was 78 now, retired, living in Florida. David had visited him once after his father's funeral, but they hadn't spoken since. Harold agreed to meet for lunch the following day. But David couldn't wait that long. He needed answers now, and he knew exactly where to get them. Patricia came home that evening at the usual time, 7 o'clock. She looked tired. She'd been crying, David could tell. Her eyes were red around the edges. She walked into the kitchen and started making dinner like it was any other night. David watched her from the doorway. He'd watched her like this 100 times before, admiring the way she moved, the quiet grace in everything she did. But now he saw something different. He saw a woman carrying a secret that had been crushing her for months, maybe longer. He asked her to sit down. She looked at him and knew immediately that something had changed. She asked what was wrong. David didn't answer. He placed a photograph on the table in front of her. It was a picture he'd taken that afternoon, blown up on his phone. The 3 children at Mercy House, Marcus, Elijah, and Amara. Patricia stared at the photograph. Her face went pale. She didn't deny knowing them. She didn't pretend to be confused. She simply sat there, frozen, like a deer caught in headlights. David asked her how long she'd known. Patricia's voice was barely a whisper when she finally spoke. She said she'd known about the children for 2 years, before they were married, before she'd ever agreed to go on a first date with him. She'd been working as a social worker at Mercy House part-time, a job she'd taken because she wanted to help children in need. She'd met Marcus first. He was 3 years old at the time, a quiet boy with sad eyes who didn't speak much. She'd felt drawn to him immediately. Then Elijah arrived, then Amara. She noticed the resemblance to David before she even knew who David was. David stared at her. He didn't understand. Patricia explained. She'd seen a photograph of David in a magazine at a doctor's office. He was on the cover, some business feature about his company. She'd recognized the children's faces in his. She started researching. She found the connection between Mercy House and the Pemberton Foundation. She found Alina, the woman who ran the orphanage, and asked her directly. Eleanor told her the truth about the Lancaster program. She told her about the children's parentage. She told her that David didn't know. David felt something shift inside him. He asked why Patricia hadn't told him. She said she'd wanted to. Every day she wanted to, but she was scared. She didn't know how he would react. She didn't know if he would believe her. She didn't know if he would blame her for knowing something he didn't. And there was something else, something she was afraid to admit. She'd fallen in love with the children before she'd fallen in love with David. Marcus, Elijah, and Amara had become the center of her world. She visited them every week. She brought them clothes, toys, books. She read them stories and helped them with their homework. She became the closest thing they had to a mother. And when she met David, she saw a chance to give them something more, a real family, a father who could provide for them, protect them, love them the way they deserved. She married David because she loved him, but she also married him because she loved them. David didn't know how to feel. Part of him was furious. She kept this secret from the beginning. Their entire marriage had been built on a lie, but another part of him understood. She'd been protecting children who had no one else. She'd been carrying a burden that should have been his to carry. And she'd been trying to find a way to tell him, waiting for the right moment, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. He asked her why she'd never found that moment. Patricia hesitated. Then she told him something that changed everything. She said she'd received a warning. 3 months after they were married, a man had come to her workplace. He was well-dressed, older, with gray hair and a calm voice. He told her that he knew what she knew. He knew about the children. He knew about the Lancaster program. And he told her that if she ever told David, there would be consequences, not just for her, but for the children. Mercy House could lose its funding. The children could be relocated, separated, disappeared into the system. She would never see them again. David asked who the man was. Patricia said she didn't know his name, but she knew who he worked for, the Pemberton Foundation. The same foundation that had been funding the orphanage for 7 years. The same foundation his father had controlled. The same foundation David now controlled, though he'd never paid attention to its operations. But that wasn't even the worst part. Patricia said the man had given her something, a document. She pulled it from a drawer in the kitchen where she'd been hiding it for 2 years. It was a legal agreement. David read it carefully. It was a trust arrangement created by his father before his death. The trust held $5 million, designated for the care of 3 unnamed beneficiaries. The trustee had discretion over how the money was used, as long as the beneficiaries remained residents of Mercy House Children's Home. If the beneficiaries were removed from the home, or if the existence of the trust was revealed to David Pemberton, the funds would be immediately transferred to a different account, controlled by the trustee, and the beneficiaries would lose all claim to the money. David read the document 3 times. His father had created a trust for his own children, but he'd structured it to keep them trapped in an orphanage. If anyone tried to give them a better life, they would lose everything. It was like a ransom note from beyond the grave. His father was controlling these children even in death. David asked Patricia if she knew who the trustee was. She said she'd tried to find out, but the document was vague. It listed a corporate entity, not a person, Pemberton Management Services. David had never heard of it, but he knew where to look, the corporate records. His father had kept everything. If this entity existed, there would be a paper trail. He drove to his family's law firm that night. The senior partner met him in the lobby, concerned by the urgency in David's voice. David demanded access to his father's private files. The partner hesitated, citing confidentiality, but David pushed. He was the sole heir. He controlled everything now. The partner finally relented and led him to a secure room in the basement. The files were extensive, boxes upon boxes of documents, organized by year and category. David searched for hours. He found the incorporation papers for Pemberton Management Services. The company had been created 8 years ago, shortly before the children were born. Its sole purpose was to manage what the documents called legacy assets. David didn't know what that meant until he found the list of assets, properties, investments, accounts, and 3 children. Listed as assets, with serial numbers instead of names. But the final document was the one that broke him. It was a letter, handwritten by his father, dated 2 weeks before his death. David recognized the handwriting immediately. The letter was addressed to the board of the Pemberton Foundation. It explained the purpose of the Lancaster program. His father had created the program to ensure that the Pemberton bloodline continued, even if David never married or had children. The program had selected women from carefully screened backgrounds, women who matched the family's genetic and social criteria. David's genetic material had been used without his knowledge to create backup heirs. The children had been placed in Mercy House to keep them hidden until they were needed. If David died without legitimate children, the backup heirs would be revealed and given their inheritance. The family empire would continue, controlled from the shadows by his father's design. His father had treated David's children like insurance policies, backup heirs to be deployed if the primary investment failed, and the trustee, the person controlling the trust that kept the children trapped, was listed on the final page. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a corporation. It was someone David had trusted his entire life. His uncle, his father's younger brother, a man who had always been kind to him, who had attended his wedding, who had pretended to mourn at his father's funeral while hiding the secret. David drove home in silence. His mind was racing, but his body felt numb. He'd learned more in 24 hours than most people learn in a lifetime. His father had stolen his genetic material. He'd created children and abandoned them. He'd set up a system to keep them hidden and trapped. His uncle had been managing the whole thing. And his wife had known everything, had married him knowing everything, had been carrying this weight alone for 2 years because she was trying to protect children she loved more than her own safety. Had a choice now. He could expose everything. He could go to the police, to the media, to the courts. He could claim his children, give them the life they deserved, tear down the system his father had built. But doing so would destroy his family's reputation, expose Patricia to the people who had threatened her, and embroil his children in a legal battle that could last for years, or he could stay silent. He could protect the secret, protect Patricia, protect the children, and live with the weight of what he knew. But there was a third option. He could find out how deep this went. The Lancaster program had been running for decades. His father had funded it, but he hadn't been the only one involved. Other families were mentioned in the documents, their names redacted but their contributions noted. This wasn't just a Pemberton secret. It was something bigger, something that connected to powerful people across the city, maybe across the country. And somewhere in those files was the truth about how far the program had gone, how many children had been created, and who else was pulling the strings. And now David had to decide what he was willing to destroy to get it. David made his decision the next morning. He called his lawyer, his private investigator, and a contacts at 3 major news outlets. He instructed his team to gather every piece of evidence they could find on the Lancaster program, Pemberton Management Services, and his uncle's involvement. He wanted criminal charges, civil suits, and media exposure. He wanted to burn the whole thing down. Then he drove to Mercy House alone. He needed to see his children, not from a doorway, not from a distance. He needed to meet them, to look them in the eyes, to understand what had been taken from them and from him. Eleanor answered the door. She didn't seem surprised to see him. She simply nodded and led him inside. The children were in the common room, playing with blocks on the floor. David stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching them. Marcus was building a tower, his tongue sticking out in concentration. Elijah was handing him blocks one by one like a careful assistant. Amara was sitting nearby, arranging dolls in a circle, talking to them in a soft voice. They looked happy. They looked like siblings. They looked like him. Eleanor introduced David as a friend. Marcus looked up and studied him with serious eyes. Elijah hid behind his older brother. Amara kept playing with her dolls, uninterested in the stranger. David sat on the floor with them. He didn't try too hard. He didn't force conversation. He simply stayed. After an hour, Marcus asked him to help with the tower. David did. After 2 hours, Elijah let David hold one of his blocks. After 3 hours, Amara crawled into David's lap without warning and fell asleep. When Patricia arrived that evening, she found David sitting on the floor with the children, reading them a story. She stopped in the doorway, her hand covering her mouth. She'd been visiting these children for 2 years. She'd never seen them this comfortable with anyone but her. David looked up and met her eyes. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She understood. They drove home together that night in silence. When they reached the penthouse, David finally spoke. He told Patricia what he was planning to do. The lawsuits, the media, the exposure. He told her it would be messy. It would destroy his family's name. It would make their lives public in ways they couldn't control. And he told her he was doing it anyway, because those children deserved more than what his father had given them. Patricia asked what would happen to them, to their marriage. David said he didn't know. He was still hurt that she'd kept the secret. He still wondered if their entire relationship had been built on a lie. But he also understood why she'd done it. She'd been protecting children who had no one else, and she'd been waiting for him to become the kind of man who could help them. The next day, David met with his uncle. He chose a public restaurant, somewhere with witnesses. He brought his lawyer and a recording device. His uncle arrived on time, dressed in a tailored suit, looking every bit the distinguished family elder. He smiled when he saw David. The smile didn't reach his eyes. David got straight to the point. He told his uncle he knew about the Lancaster program. He knew about the trust. He knew about the threats against Patricia. He knew everything. His uncle's smile faded. For a moment, the old man looked genuinely surprised. Then his expression hardened into something cold and calculating. His uncle told David he was making a mistake. The program had existed for 40 years. It had protected family legacies across the city, powerful families, families with connections to politicians, judges, law enforcement. If David exposed it, he wouldn't just be destroying his own reputation. He'd be making enemies of people who could destroy him right back. His uncle suggested a compromise. David could take custody of the children. He could raise them as his own. But the program itself would remain secret. The other families would remain protected, and David would keep his inheritance, his company, his place in the world. David asked how many other children the program had created. His uncle didn't answer. David asked again. His uncle finally said the number, 47. 47 children over 40 years, born from the genetic material of wealthy donors, placed in orphanages and foster homes across the state, kept hidden as backup heirs or quietly removed when they became inconvenient. David ended the meeting. He told his uncle that he would be contacting the FBI, the state attorney general, and every news organization that would listen. His uncle warned him one last time. He said David was choosing the wrong side of history. David said he was choosing the only side that mattered. The following weeks were a blur. David's lawyers filed petitions for custody of Marcus, Elijah, and Amara. His investigators uncovered documents linking 17 prominent families to the Lancaster program. His media contacts ran stories that dominated the news cycle for days. The FBI opened an investigation. The state attorney general announced a criminal probe. His uncle was arrested on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and child trafficking. Other arrests followed. David's family reputation collapsed. The Pemberton name, once synonymous with success and power, became a symbol of corruption and exploitation. The company's stock plummeted. Business partners fled. Friends stopped calling. David lost billions in paper wealth. He didn't care. 6 months after that first night at Mercy House, David stood in a courtroom and legally adopted Marcus, Elijah, and Amara. Patricia stood beside him. She'd been there through everything: the media firestorm, the legal battles, the collapse of his social standing. Their marriage had been tested in ways neither of them had expected. But somewhere in the chaos, they'd found something real. Not the fairy tale romance they'd started with, but something stronger. A partnership forged in crisis. A shared purpose that mattered more than comfort or status. The children moved into the penthouse. They were scared at first, overwhelmed by the size of the place, the staff, the strangeness of their new life. Patricia quit her job and devoted herself to helping them adjust. David came home early every night to have dinner with them. They went slowly, they made mistakes, they learned each other, and slowly the orphanage children became a family. But there was one more thing David needed to know. During the investigation, his lawyers had uncovered records of the women who had carried the children. The surrogates, recruited and paid by the program, their identities kept in sealed files. David requested those files. He wanted to know if the children's birth mothers were alive, if they wanted contact, if there was another piece of this story waiting to be told. The files arrived 3 months after the adoption. David opened them alone in his study. 3 names, 3 addresses. 2 of the women had moved and couldn't be located, but the third name stopped him cold. The woman who had carried all 3 children. A surrogate who had been hired by the program to carry Marcus, then Elijah, then Amara, one after another, over the course of 6 years. Her name was Patricia's mother. David read the file again, certain he'd made a mistake, but the name was clear, along with photographs, medical records, and payment receipts. Patricia's mother had been a surrogate for the program. She had carried David's children years before Patricia had ever met him. Patricia hadn't just stumbled onto the secret at Mercy House. She had grown up with it in a way. Her mother had carried these children. Her mother had been part of the system that created them. And Patricia had never told David any of this. He called Patricia into the study. He placed the file on the desk in front of her. She looked at it and went pale. She started to explain, but David held up his hand. He didn't want explanations yet. He wanted the truth, all of it. Patricia sat down and told him everything. Her mother had been a surrogate for the program for years. It was how the family had survived after Patricia's father left. Her mother never talked about it, but Patricia had figured it out when she was a teenager. She'd found documents, overheard conversations. She'd grown up knowing that children were being created and placed in orphanages. When she was old enough, she tried to find them. She'd found Marcus first, then the others. And when she discovered who their father was, she'd made a choice. She'd gone to that charity gala specifically to meet David. Not for money, not for status, but because she believed he deserved to know the truth, even if she couldn't figure out how to tell him. David listened without interrupting. When she finished, he didn't know what to feel. Betrayal again, but also understanding. She'd been trapped in this web since childhood, just like the children, just like him, and she'd spent years trying to find a way out for all of them. He asked her why she hadn't told him about her mother. She said she was afraid. If the program found out she knew, they might hurt her mother. They might hurt the children. They might hurt her. And she didn't know if David would believe her or if he'd think she was part of the conspiracy. David stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the city below, the empire his father had built, the world that was now crumbling around him. Then he turned back to Patricia. He said he didn't know if he could trust her completely. Not yet, but he wanted to try, because she was the only person who understood what he'd lost and what he'd found. They called the children in for dinner that night, all three of them running into the dining room with the chaos and noise that had become normal in their home. Marcus was talking about school. Elijah was showing Amara a toy he'd brought from the playroom. Patricia smiled at them with tears in her eyes. David watched his family and felt something he'd never felt before. Not control, not power, not the satisfaction of a deal well made, just gratitude. And for the first time, the backup heirs became a real family. The Lancaster program is gone now, dismantled by the very man it was designed to serve. 47 children have been identified. Families have been notified. Criminal investigations are ongoing in 3 states. The powerful families who built their legacies on secrets are watching their empires crack under the weight of exposure. But the questions remain. How many other programs like this exist? How many children are growing up in orphanages and foster homes, unaware that they were created as insurance policies for wealthy families? How many surrogates were recruited, paid, and silenced? The system David exposed was one program in one city, operating for 40 years under the protection of money and influence. It's naive to think it was the only one. David lost $3 billion in the months after the story broke. His company survived barely after he sold off assets and restructured everything from the ground up. He doesn't attend gala events anymore. He doesn't sit on charity boards. He spends his time with his children, helping them heal from years of neglect and uncertainty. Patricia is still with him, still earning his trust one day at a time. Their marriage isn't perfect, but it's real. And in a world built on lies, that might be the only thing that matters. Marcus is 8 now. He plays soccer on weekends and wants to be a pilot when he grows up. Elijah is 6, still quiet, still watchful, but he smiles more than he used to. Amara just turned 5. She calls David daddy like she's been saying it her whole life. They don't know the full story yet. They don't know about the program, the trust, the grandfather who treated them like assets. Someday they'll learn the truth. David will tell them himself when they're old enough to understand. And he'll tell them something else too. He'll tell them that they weren't backup heirs or insurance policies or numbers in a file. They were wanted. They were loved. They were the reason he burned down everything his father built. Because some secrets deserve to be destroyed, and some families are worth more than any fortune. If this story moved you, hit subscribe and the notification bell. We tell the stories others won't, and we'll see you in the next video.